about were in the opponent's house. When they were done and they won by 4 votes, the staff and the board of canvassers, as well as their attorney, broke out the champagne. and they celebrated. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but can you imagine in a regular vote between 2 candidates, a couple aldermen or a couple mayor, if after recounting on a close vote, they'd broken out the champagne?
Good morning. Welcome to Talkin' Racine, and we're sick of it. George, how you doing?
Doing fine, actually.
George Myers.
Yeah.
Jim,
good.
You okay?
Good. Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm feeling fine.
Yeah.
Dr. Ken Jorgen, your host. And we're going to talk to George. And
oh, really? Finally, I get to say something on this show.
What I mean is we're going to have a discussion about the Sandy Weidner case, is what I meant to say.
Okay.
And that's nearly 2 years. Sandy Weidner was waiting for a decision from the appellate court, and it finally came through. And what the appellate court said was, well, it appears that the circuit court judge erred, so this is what was done in error, and we're going to send it back to him. And you can continue the case from here. So
it took 4 months to do that, or whatever it was?
Oh, it took 20 months.
20 months.
20 months, yeah.
What a paragraph.
I mean, her attorney filed an 84-page brief explaining all the things that were wrong that needed to be considered and corrected, and they come back with, oh, well, the judge made a mistake here.
Sorry about that. Go back and try again. Huh?
Yeah. So basically, now they're going to have to drop that contempt charge against her, because there was nothing to contempt.
Yeah, right. Because he said it should have not been a sealed case.
Yeah.
Well, she talked about a case that should not have been sealed. Well, so the contempt charge is gone.
Yeah.
But
what is the point really now of pursuing this? I mean, this happened. It was at the height of a mayoral campaign.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, but Sandy was running for mayor at the time against now Mayor Corey Mason. And at the height of the campaign is when City Attorney Scott Letney, who it appears they get along pretty good, the mayor and the city attorney. Yep. I don't know if there was anything going on behind the scenes beforehand. I'd hate to imply anything like that. But this came at a very opportune time for the Corey Mason campaign. He came up with this possible ethics violation, is what was laid on Sandy Weidner at a very key point in the campaign. Well, now, this is like 2 years later, and she has actually completed her term on the city council. She decided she didn't want to run again. She'd had enough. And, of course, the mayoral race is long gone. So what is there left to argue about, really? Can you think of anything, George?
Well, what do you mean? Can I think? Yeah.
I mean, what is Sandy left with to argue about of substance? I mean, she can go after the judge and after the city attorney.
That's what's left to argue about.
Yeah, but
there's nothing with the
in terms of the original case.
No, that's gone.
Well,
they achieved their purpose. They got Corey Mason in there.
Yeah.
So okay, we're done. Thank you, Sandy.
Well, one of the things that came
go home now
with the appeals court, and what's the only thing they really addressed was the fact that she wanted to amend her complaint or her appeal or her hearing, whatever, to a mandamus actually. And had 6 months. It was an appeal she made. Yeah, it was actually 6 months she was able to do that. The judge said, no, you can't do it. We're not going to allow that. Well, by law, she had 6 months. The appeals court come back and said, yes, you did have 6 months, and you should hear that, and she had that opportunity. What she was asking for was the PowerPoint that they used to take her to the ethics board. And she said, that I want that PowerPoint. And that PowerPoint was then after she made her claim for a mandamus to force them to give it to her. Letney passed it out to all the alderpersons, this PowerPoint. Well, Sandy said, no, that's not the PowerPoint you used in the hearing or the closed session to condemn me.
Yeah, he released, I think, a bunch of emails.
Yeah,
is what it was.
Yeah, and it was bogus. The whole thing was bogus. And she said, no, I want the original. And the judge said, well, he gave it to you, Well, no, he didn't. That was the thrust of it. She should still get that PowerPoint. She still has a right to.
She should have all those slides,
Yeah,
Yeah,
she should have everything.
Yeah.
So is there still something to fight? Yes. Is there something to fight in that courtroom? I would say so. I think she was persecuted, truthfully.
Yeah. I think
that's the thing to fight. I mean, first of all, she recognizes it. She recognizes slides.
Yeah.
She just wanted, she's seen many, many emails. All right. Now, which of the many, many emails were using that 20? Well, she couldn't list them all down, so just give them to me. Give me the ones you actually used. No, we can't do that. That's all secret. But even though it's been all over the place and a lot of people have seen them. So it was a totally farce thing. Now for her to get them now is really meaningless. I mean, they're done. They're done with the case. They got their man in. They got their mayor in.
They paid $150,000 to the city's personal attorney, Scott Letney's personal attorney out of Milwaukee. I mean, that's basically what it is. Yes, he doesn't have to answer to anybody. Common Council doesn't have to give approval. He wants to hire an attorney. Let him hire an attorney on taxpayer dollar.
Yeah. In the meantime,
so bogus.
Sandy had to put up money out of her own
Absolutely.
pocket, tens of thousands of dollars, to basically defend herself, and now she's going to have submitted a claim to get her money back that she spent, that she would not have had to have spent had they not put forth this bogus case.
This case made national attention, and the appeals court comes back with a paragraph. Oh, the judge erred.
20 months later. How long does it take to find out that somebody screwed up?
I mean, you know what that is? It's a judge covering the other judges.
That's all it is. If they sent it back right away, it'd been like a slap, you know.
Or actually go in and say, hey, you can't have sealed courts. You can't hold emails that are available to the public. You can't hold those off as attorney-client privilege. The whole case was bogus from the beginning. And it was a witch hunt, as far as I'm concerned. And the appeals court came in and just continued on with it.
Yeah, it took all that time, and then they didn't really say anything other than, well, he made a mistake. Yeah. And the way I like to liken it is like, a weasel is not going to condemn another weasel for killing chickens. And that's the way I view the way that the appeals court responded to the error that the local circuit court made.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It's going to move on, and should she ask for another judge?
Absolutely.
No, got to get out of that.
Absolutely.
One, that's for sure.
Yes.
That'd be silly to go in there with that.
Well, I think we're going to move on, too. We're going to move on now to the Racine Unified School District referendum. We're going to go over to the other studio, Studio B.
Yep.
And George and I are going to sit. George was a big part of the recount effort, and so was Dennis Monte, who is sitting waiting to join us. So Jim's going to run the camera. We're going to sit and talk about it, so we'll be back with you in just a minute. Okay, we're back. And along with George, now we have Dennis Monte. A lot of you probably remember Dennis from the complaint against the Machinery Row epidemic. And it's been what? Before we get going, that's been 3 years you've been waiting
for. Going on 3 years, that's right. Yeah. Still nothing.
Well, anyway, you probably remember that there was a unified school district referendum on the ballot recently in the election, and it was for the citizens to authorize $1 billion worth of expenses over the next 30 years. After the vote came in, it turned out there was a 5-vote differential in just the raw vote. So, given that there was so much money at stake and so little difference, we thought it was imperative that a recount be done. So right. George and Dennis and Jim Sewell and a few other people actually too were petitioners for a recount. Well, the recount has taken place over the last week, and the final results, the certified results, have not come in yet, but there is so much that is questionable that went on during that recount that hot government, a local association or organization, has decided we're calling for a end of the recount, end the process, declare the whole election null and void, or the whole vote, and do it again at the next election if Unified wants to do that. You know, if they don't want to do it, fine, we'll just forget the whole thing. But I'm sure that they still would like to have, if it is thrown out, they're going to want to have a vote, I would expect. Mm-hmm. Now, you spent quite a bit of time down there, as did you, not quite as much as George. George was like a full-time employee, and you were first apprentice, I guess.
Yes.
In this project. And what was your experience kind of quickly from day one on. I mean, it took a while to get your feet wet and to understand.
Well,
the
yeah,
process.
it was very impressive to walk in there at first and see this huge layout. The whole floor of Festival Hall was set out with lines and tables, and felt like I was walking into a war room of some sort. And so, but it was very well organized. As I proceeded on, it was also very well orchestrated. In other words, Racine Unified, it was their show.
Right.
And it was different than most recount on elections, where you have a candidate or two candidates and they're very close together, and the clerk in the district is in charge of doing the not only the voting but and doing the surveying and the final.
So it's designed to have impartial oversight.
Right, and they do the certification of the vote, and then if the vote is real close and there's a recount, they're also in charge of the recount. But they are relatively nonpartisan. It's two candidates, and whether one candidate or the other wins, it's not up to them. They're just trying to get the election straight. Well, this is a totally different type of setup. In this case, the organization or the governmental unit that held the election had a part in the election, had an interest in the election. They wanted this referendum money. They wanted the $1 billion. So they held the election, and then they also certified the results, and it was that close, and 5 votes, and it got a petition for appeal to recount. They also ran the recount.
Yeah, they had.
And so
after
after a couple of days, you begin to realize I'm an outsider. I'm not just an equal candidate with a nonpartisan or a mediator in the middle.
Yeah.
It's me versus them.
And the mediator had a vested interest in the outcome.
Right.
So that's not to imply that they did anything.
But the whole bent was towards it. It was like they were the house.
Exactly.
And it's not that the house has got crooked machines, but they want to win. They want
Absolutely.
money.
And I think.
And the result of this election was the house won, and then the recount.
Well, we don't know about the recount yet.
Well, they haven't certified the results, but the first count is that they won by four votes.
First indication is that they won by 4 votes.
That's what they have
5.
announced.
Yeah.
They have announced they won 4 votes. They are now busy canvassing, what's called canvassing, and going through all the facts and figures. And this was a very confusing recount. As we get into this discussion, it's not just a matter of looking at ballots and saying, okay, let's just check the numbers.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that a little bit, because Dennis, you've written a thing that you're going to submit to the court. Is that where this is going?
This one is actually going to an attorney with the Wisconsin Election Commission, to the attorney that was in charge of the canvassing for the recount, to the county clerk, as well as the city clerk.
Okay, and you've got itemized here 9 different things that you're objecting to that took place during the recount.
Yes.
That could have had an impact on the final tally.
Right.
One of them, and this is an overriding one, the vote was seriously impaired by confusion leading up to Election Day. Well, we all are familiar with the fact that this coronavirus has created a quarantine or a stay-at-home order. So there was a lot of confusion as to whether or not the election was going to be held. It was going to be postponed, then it was going to be held, then it was going to be extended in terms of like absentee ballots. That was going to be allowed, and then the Supreme Court came and said, no, it's going to be held on the day that it was supposed to be held. And, there's not going to be an extension as to how many days you have to get the absentee ballots in. Mm-hmm. So there were all of these things that were in flux.
Yes.
And it was very, very confusing to the voting public. I know for a fact that there were people who did not know what to expect. There were a lot of reports of absentee ballots not arriving to the person that requested them in a timely manner. And why don't you go over a couple of these?
I would just go on the first one you covered there, because some of those votes came in, and when the absentee voter wrote on the witness line, in other words, the absentee voter has to sign his ballot or the envelope in which it contains
Or
the
her
ballot.
ballot. Women have to vote in
right.
charge.
And then the witness has to sign it, and then there has to be a witness address.
Right.
But for that one day that it was in there, the courts had ruled that if because of the coronavirus thing, that they could write in, could not get a witness due to coronavirus, or just write COVID-19, something like that. Well, those came up for discussion, and of course, they were denied. But the attorney, who was supposedly a petitioner for the school district, has appealed, challenged every one of those, and said that they should count. So you have something like that. It still hasn't been decided. It could still be in flux, and it could still be brought up.
Yeah.
And that was about at least 10 that I saw. There might be more in envelopes that I did not see that came up to that front desk.
Well, some of the things that I saw, and I had limited interaction down there, but this whole thing was thrown into chaos to begin with. And then they came up with a response to the chaos. We're gonna have a solution to this particular problem, and this is gonna be the solution. And then somebody else will say, I don't like that solution, we gotta do this instead. Then it would go up to the court. By the time all of these things were cleaned up and final decisions were made, I mean, we're on election day, and a lot of people don't know what the actual mandate is. They had no idea of how they were supposed to really vote.
Well, for a while, the governor, he had even said that he wanted to extend it where you could submit ballots during that whole week up to the 13th.
Right.
And that got appealed, and so it was decided that, you had to bring them in. The courts had to be mailed by the 7th, and if they were mailed, then they had to be received by the 13th, but you couldn't mail them during that period of time. So what people were doing at the last minute is they had all ballot filled out, witness and everything, and then they would bring in and file it with the clerk, and some of those got questioned because it looked like there was no postmark on it. It looked like, how did this get to the clerk's office?
Right. Well, my personal feeling is, and I'm sure that you guys are in agreement with it, there were so many things that went wrong. And then there were so many adjustments made.
Yes.
And then there were corrections to the adjustments.
Right.
That it's just,
it was going back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, it is just not
the whole election got
possible
screwy.
for the actual will of the voters to be discerned at this point, in my estimation. It's been lost.
This is not the will of voters. No.
Yeah. So I'm very much in favor of this thing being just canned.
Right.
Declare it null and void. Reschedule it later on.
Well, the result of that too was that there were a lot of votes that were cast improperly because it was so messy, but that the clerks had accepted anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
And that went both ways. There were votes that were rejected that should have been accepted.
Right.
And there were accepted votes that should have been rejected.
Right. Well, now the votes that were rejected that should have been accepted, what they did later on was that they at least opened them up and counted them. So those votes eventually got counted. It was the votes that got accepted and cast
that should not have been
because because of the legal implications that we've just been talking about. That when those came up, and this came up 91 times, where they decided this ballot was illegal cast, it cannot be counted. Well, the ballot's gone. It's unmarked.
There's no way.
There's no way to get that thing back out.
They do not connect the envelope to the vote.
No.
So that connection is gone.
Right.
So you got 91 votes that were cast.
Right.
That were cast incorrectly.
Right.
So what did they do about that?
So then they stick all the ballots. This is the thing you stick in the machine. All the ballots of the mail-in candidates, the people who voted regularly.
This was done ward by ward.
Ward by
so there
ward.
might only be like 5 in one particular ward, but
there were never that few, but there was always at least 40 or 50 in there. Some of them were big stacks this high.
No. I'm talking about ballots that needed to be replaced.
Oh, to be replaced, yeah. Anyway, there would be a stack about this high to this high of absentee voters. The people that voted regularly are in another stack.
Yeah, they're counted. They're good.
But they take this stack and they pull out at random however many it is. Let's say it's 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever, 5, whatever it is. They pull out at random from that stack and they eliminate that vote.
So what is actually happening there? There are ballots that should not have been counted.
Right.
And
they're still in there.
They're still in there.
But some legitimate
there are
votes
that should be counted.
They've been pulled out.
An equal number of the ones that shouldn't have been counted are being pulled out.
Right.
So there are people whose votes should not have been counted that are eventually counted, and there's votes that should not have.
Should have been
Should have been.
counted.
So
Yeah.
it's just.
If you voted absentee and did everything right, your vote may not have counted.
Yeah.
Right.
It may have been pulled out. And that's where I say, because there were 91 such instances, and there were only 5 vote difference, this no longer became the will of the people, it became the luck of the draw. That's
Right.
what that's
And there is a provision in the Wisconsin Election Commission procedures called a drawdown. And that occurs, number one, because of the votes that were included that should not have been included, but also in the case that a hand count does not agree with the machine count. Well, I think the spirit of that is that, say for instance, you have a game in sports, a tie, and you flip a coin to decide who the winner is. Or say you have an election that is extremely close. Say you've got 2 people running for an office, and it's a tie, and they agree on a coin flip to decide who won it. Well, that's one thing. But when you have $1 billion at stake, and now you have 90 or 91 drawdowns where invalid votes are replacing the votes of someone who legally voted, that's an awful heavy burden to put on the vote count that really, as George and Ken said, doesn't really show the intent of the voter. It is luck of the draw. So those of you who voted legally, followed all the steps, followed the instructions, absentee voters
91 people like that
lost their votes.
Lost their vote. Right.
And I
Now,
think
here's one that I want to ask you about. Witness accounts of RUSD employees, Unified School District employees, working as poll workers. Now, I'm not saying that anybody did any intentionally committed any mischief, but these were people who were called in at the last minute to replace people who felt uncomfortable about working at the polls.
and weren't trained.
So they weren't trained completely, they weren't screened effectively, and there are reports that some of the things that happened at the polling place was when a person would get their ballot, the poll worker, and this is strictly forbidden, would say, don't forget to vote for the referendum.
Yes.
Now, we've got actual people who have said that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
That is strictly forbidden. That's called electioneering.
Right.
And that's item number G here of the 9 that you got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when are you going to actually file this? Do you know?
I'm still going to be working on some of the wording, but I intend to file this on Monday.
So that's today.
No. Yes,
Yeah,
today, because this airs on Monday. Yes. All right. I will on Monday, and I will follow up with a notarized written copy sent by express mail to each one of the people that are listed here to receive it.
Okay. Now I believe that you have 5 days after the election is certified to.
Correct.
file
So
it.
it'll depend on when the vote count is actually certified
Right.
by the RUSD canvassing board.
Now, one thing I'd also like to put kind of an appeal out there to any of our viewers is that if you experience some of this electioneering when you went out to vote, or know somebody who has, we would like to know who you are and who the person is that you know, because the more people we have that bring this forward,
yeah.
we know that the 2 people that we know of aren't the only 2. I'm sure they were talking a lot of voters that went through there. If we could come up with 20 or 30 names like that, it would be much more impressive to who's ever going to evaluate this, that this was a problem.
Well, it gives a validity to the claim that it was a problem.
And if you witnessed any other irregularities, now we've had witnesses communicate to us that at the Tyler Domer polling place, which is the one that's right next to Park High School, which was a drive-up voting place, they didn't go inside, that they were never asked for their identification. In fact, they weren't even asked their name. They were asked for their address. They came out, they looked them up, they handed them the ballot, he filled out the ballot, gave it back to them. Now, if you do an inside vote, the procedure is they ask for your address, your name comes up on the screen, which is what has the voting list on it. They verify your address, and then they scan your driver's license. And this helps to protect the integrity of our elections. But when you can drive up, simply give an address, not show any ID, and vote, it's real questionable. I mean, that's just sloppy election practice.
Right.
Yeah. Very sloppy. And again, we're not casting any aspersions on these people who were pressed into service at the very last moment, but that's just an indication of how badly this thing was managed. And we're not saying that people mismanaged it intentionally.
Right.
It's just that it came upon everybody so quickly, and there were so many things changed and rechanged that it's just not possible for this to have been a good count.
There's a board of canvassers during the whole recount process of 3, and questions will come up about a particular instance, like a particular envelope, and should we accept this one or not? And of course, the first one to get the chance to look at it is the board of canvassers, and they basically decide what it is. All we can do, if we don't like it, is that we challenge it. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, we're not allowed in on the vote on whether it should be accepted or not. They vote on it. They decide. Well, and it's going to influence their vote.
So what is happening with those challenges? Have those all been resolved?
No, none of them have been resolved. And
how many are there?
Well, I would guess, I didn't count them exactly, but I have at least 20 challenges in on various items.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I have probably at least that many, probably more like 30.
Yeah.
So there could be as many as 50 challenges out there.
Challenges on particular items, just the way certain things were voted on, that we can go in, look at the record, and then we can decide whether we want to take that up to the Wisconsin Election Commission for further adjudication.
Now, it goes to the Election Commission first. Does this end up in the courts eventually?
Well, it doesn't it could, yeah, it can. So some things will have to go, I understand, directly to the courts. If there's a ballot or something that it's not covered by a Wisconsin Elections Commission's procedures, but we feel that this should be counted, this particular type of ballot, then that would go directly to circuit court. Or no, I guess it would be circuit court, yeah. But it goes directly to court, doesn't go through the Wisconsin Election Commission. For instance, no voter address, all right? Witness
address.
No witness address. If there's no witness address there, generally that was concluded. Now there might have been one that was kind of sloppily written or something like that, or it's got the city stamp on it, and the individual signed it, but we know the individual doesn't live at City Hall, for the witness doesn't live at City Hall, so what the heck's that doing there? And it might have been a scribbly signature that nobody recognized. Well, do you count it or not? See, something like that would probably stay with the WEC, Wisconsin Election Commission. But another instance where a voter got down to, put his marks in all the proper circles, but when he got down to the last one, instead of putting in the circle under no, he put it in the O.
Oh, yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And so...
He voted yes on the one referendum, and he
voted yes on one referendum, and where there were peoples next to the circles,
yeah.
He circled it. But when he got down, or she, who knows what was down there, he got down to the last one, wanted to vote no in the for the referendum. Instead of putting it in a circle next to no, he filled in the O.
Yeah.
All right? Well, that's not covered by the WEC. Mm-hmm. That might have to go straight to circuit court, because it's voters' intent, and our argument is the voter obviously wanted to do that for some reason, but we'd have to make an argument, because it's not clear cut of just whether that should be accepted as a vote or not.
Well, you asked an interesting question earlier on. Did your vote count? I think that's a very important question for everybody that voted. Yes. To ponder a little bit. And the way this thing turned out, this is $500 million. No, it's $1 billion.
It's $1 billion.
$1 billion. Yes. $1 billion over 30 years' time. They're asking to be authorized to spend. That's a huge amount of money for a community this size. And to be decided on essentially
5 votes, but no.
Well, it comes down to basically coin flip.
That's right. It's not. Yeah, it's essentially down to draw the cards.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, how many ballots did they draw down? Was it
90, I counted 91.
So that's like 91 coin
Yeah.
flips.
Yes.
Yep. That was my 47 and 44. Yep. So it was 91. Yep. Coin flips. Theoretically random.
Yeah.
And it's been lost. You know, the will of the voters has obviously been lost. One little crowning point to all this, where we talked about we're in the opponent's house. When they were done and they won by 4 votes, the staff and the board of canvassers, as well as their attorney, broke out the champagne, and they celebrated. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but can you imagine in a regular vote between 2 candidates, a couple aldermen or a couple mayor, if after recounting on a close vote, they'd broken out the champagne? You know, it just wouldn't happen.
Well, what if the no votes were 4 votes ahead? Would they have given you the champagne?
I wondered that. Yeah.
Here, congratulations.
It would have been packed up
Enjoy.
and let's go home. You know,
Yeah,
too bad.
yeah. Well,
So it just shows the bias that was there. We were the outsiders. It was harder for us to get something done than it was for the unified district, for their side to get something done, and it was just what needs to be changed in the law is that if there is a recount for something the government's done, and most of those are going, as far as I know, is going to be referendums. So it's a referendum that you need a recount. You have to bring in a separate entity from the entity that ran the election for that reason.
A neutral oversight.
A neutral
Yes.
oversight.
Yeah.
Board of canvassers and a lawyer that runs the thing and makes sure that everything is as legal as
Somebody
possible.
that's well versed in election law.
Right, because it was
Yeah.
getting real obvious towards the end where the decisions, the legal decisions were definitely favoring Unified as opposed to favoring us.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go, folks. I think that pretty much wraps it up. We're going to keep a close eye on this one again. I mean, this is another issue that's kind of unresolved at the moment. And I hope that you finally hear something after 3 years on that Machinery Row complaint from the district attorney's office or some form of law enforcement to address that complaint.
Well, I sent numerous follow-up letters to the district attorney's office asking for an update on where it stands and who's investigating it, and
Nothing.
no response.
Crickets.
Yes.
George, good to see you as a guest.
we.
We'll see you at the big table again next week.
Okay.
And we'll see all of you next week, too. Thanks for being here.